I lived with a dead person for 3 months, and I didn't realize it until I watched her eat the same meal every single day at exactly 6:47 p.m., chewing each bite exactly 17 times before swallowing. Let me know in the comments if you've experienced something similar, because what I'm about to tell you will make you question everyone you live with. My name is Sarah, and I'm 24 years old. I moved to Los Angeles in September 2023 with big dreams and a small bank account. Like most people my age trying to make it in this city, I needed a roommate to afford rent on anything decent. I found a beautiful 2-bedroom apartment in Silver Lake, hardwood floors, big windows, and surprisingly affordable. The catch? I had to find someone to split the rent with within 2 weeks or I'd lose the place. I posted on Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace, and every roommate finding app I could think of. Most responses were either creepy guys who clearly had ulterior motives or people who seemed completely unreliable. I was getting desperate when I received a message from someone named Emma. Her message was perfect, polite, professional, and she included references from previous landlords. She said she was 26, worked in graphic design, and preferred quiet environments. She offered to pay the first month's rent up front and the security deposit. It seemed too good to be true, but I was running out of time. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop in Silver Lake. I got there early, nervous about meeting this potential roommate who might be my saving grace. At exactly 3:02 p.m., a woman walked in who matched Emma's description perfectly. She was about my height, with shoulder-length brown hair and pale skin. She wore a simple black dress and carried a leather purse. "Sarah?" she asked, approaching my table. "Yes, you must be Emma. Nice to meet you." She smiled, but something about it felt practiced, like she had rehearsed it in a mirror. Still, she was polite and asked all the right questions about the apartment. She seemed genuinely interested and had clearly done her research about the neighborhood. "I'm a quiet person," she said, stirring her coffee methodically. "I work from home most days, so I'll mainly be in my room. I don't have guests over often, and I prefer to keep common areas clean." Everything she said was exactly what I wanted to hear. She passed my mental roommate checklist with flying colors. We talked for about an hour, and she agreed to take the room. She even insisted on paying the first month's rent that same day, pulling out an envelope of cash from her purse. "I prefer to pay in cash," she explained. "I don't trust digital transactions for large amounts." I thought it was a bit old-fashioned, but I wasn't about to complain. We went to the apartment together so she could see the space. She walked through each room slowly, almost like she was memorizing the layout. In what would become her bedroom, she stood in the center and closed her eyes for a moment. "This will work perfectly," she said, opening her eyes. "When can I move in?" "Whenever you're ready," I replied. "I can get you a key made tomorrow." Tomorrow would be ideal. Oh, hit the like button if this story's giving you chills, because things are about to get much stranger. The next day, Emma showed up at exactly 9 a.m. with 2 suitcases and a cardboard box. That was it. No furniture, no decorations, no personal items beyond what fit in those 3 containers. I offered to help her move in, but she politely declined. "I prefer to organize my space myself," she said. "I'm very particular about where things go." I respected her privacy and went about my day. I could hear her moving around in her room, but it was quiet, just soft footsteps and the occasional sound of something being placed down. No dragging furniture, no hammering, no typical moving in noises. That evening, I decided to be a good roommate and cook dinner for both of us. I made pasta with marinara sauce. Nothing fancy, but enough for 2 people. I knocked on her door around 6:30 p.m. "Emma, I made dinner if you'd like some." "Thank you, but I already ate," came her voice from behind the door. "I appreciate the offer." I thought it was a bit strange since I hadn't seen her leave the apartment or heard any cooking sounds, but maybe she had eaten before moving in. I left a covered plate in the refrigerator with a note saying she could heat it up later if she changed her mind. The next morning, the plate was still there, untouched. Our first week living together was remarkably smooth. Emma was exactly as she had described, quiet, clean and respectful. She worked from her room during the day, and I could occasionally hear the soft clicking of keyboard keys. She was so quiet that sometimes I forgot she was there. But there were small things that struck me as odd. She never seemed to shower, yet she never smelled bad. I never heard water running in her bathroom, never saw wet towels, never noticed steam under her door. Her hair always looked exactly the same style, same level of cleanliness. She also never seemed to do laundry. I did mine every Sunday, and the washer and dryer were in a shared closet. In 3 weeks, I never saw her use them. Never saw her carrying laundry, never heard the machines running when I wasn't using them. Most strange of all, she never seemed to eat the food I could see or smell. I'm a pretty observant person, and I started paying attention to our kitchen habits. I would notice when things in the refrigerator were running low or when I needed to take out the trash, but Emma's presence never seemed to affect any of these household rhythms. Subscribe if you want to hear more terrifying true stories, because what I discovered next made me question everything I thought I knew about my roommate. It was a Friday night in October, about a month after Emma had moved in. I was in my room watching Netflix when I heard a sound from the kitchen. It was exactly 6:47 p.m. I remember because I glanced at my phone when the sound caught my attention. It was a very specific sound, the scraping of a fork against a plate, repeated in a steady rhythm. Scrape, pause, scrape, pause. I muted my show and listened more carefully. The scraping continued for exactly the same duration, then stopped. I thought maybe Emma had finally decided to eat some real food, and I was curious about what she was making. I quietly opened my bedroom door and peeked toward the kitchen. I couldn't see her from my angle, but I could hear her chewing. The sound was mechanical, rhythmic. Chew, 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 pause. Chew, 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 pause. I counted without meaning to. 17 chews, then a pause, then 17 chews again. The pattern was so precise, it almost sounded artificial. The next night, at exactly 6:47 p.m., I heard the same sound. The same scraping, the same rhythmic chewing, the same 17-count pattern. I started to pay closer attention to Emma's evening routine. Every single night, at exactly 6:47 p.m., Emma would go to the kitchen and eat something. I never saw her prepare food, never saw her clean dishes afterward, never noticed any evidence of cooking. But that sound happened every night like clockwork. After a week of this, my curiosity got the better of me. On the following Friday, I positioned myself in the living room where I could see into the kitchen. I pretended to be reading a book, but I was watching the clock on my phone. 6:46 p.m. 6:47 p.m. Right on schedule, Emma emerged from her room and walked to the kitchen. She opened the refrigerator and took out a plate. On the plate was what appeared to be a sandwich. The same sandwich, from what I could tell. She sat at the kitchen table with her back to me and began eating. The fork scraping started immediately. She was using a fork to eat a sandwich, which was odd enough, but the sound was exactly the same as every other night. The chewing pattern was identical. 17 chews, pause, 17 chews, pause. I watched her eat for about 10 minutes. She never varied the pattern, never looked around, never seemed to notice I was there. When she finished, she took the plate to the sink, rinsed it, and put it in the dishwasher. Then she walked back to her room. I immediately went to the kitchen to investigate. I opened the dishwasher and looked at the plate she had just put in. It was completely clean. Not just rinsed clean. It looked like it had never had food on it at all. No crumbs, no sauce residue, no evidence that anything had been eaten off it. I checked the sink. Nothing. I checked the refrigerator. I couldn't find any sandwich or any ingredients that might have been used to make one. It was like the meal had never existed. Comment below what you think was really happening here, because this was just the beginning of the disturbing patterns I started to notice. The next day, I decided to do a little experiment. I woke up early and went to the kitchen before Emma's usual routine. I took note of everything in the refrigerator, every item, every condiment, every leftover. I even took photos with my phone so I could compare later. At 6:47 p.m., I watched Emma perform her identical routine. She opened the refrigerator, took out a plate with a sandwich, ate it with the same fork scraping and 17-chew pattern, cleaned the plate, and returned to her room. After she left, I immediately checked the refrigerator against my photos. Everything was exactly the same. Nothing was missing, nothing was moved, nothing was consumed. The sandwich she had eaten didn't exist in any form I could detect. This is when I started to seriously question what was happening. I began paying closer attention to Emma's other behaviors, and the more I watched, the more disturbed I became. She never seemed to sleep. I'm a light sleeper, and I never heard her moving around at night like a normal person would. No trips to the bathroom, no tossing and turning, no creaking bed springs. But every morning, at exactly 7 a.m., I would hear her door open and the sound of her walking to the bathroom. The bathroom visits were another strange pattern. She would be in there for exactly 12 minutes every morning, not 11, not 13, always 12. I never heard the shower running, never heard the toilet flush, never heard any of the normal sounds you'd expect from someone getting ready for the day. When she came out of the bathroom, she looked exactly the same as when she went in. Same hair, same clothes, same everything. It was like she was performing a routine that served no actual purpose. I started keeping a notebook, documenting these patterns. Emma's behavior was so consistent, it was almost like she was following a script. Everything happened at the same time, in the same way, every single day. Let me know in the comments if you've ever noticed someone in your life following unnaturally precise routines, because what I discovered next made me realize Emma might not be human at all. It was a Wednesday night in November, about 2 months after Emma had moved in. I was having trouble sleeping, so I decided to get some water from the kitchen. It was around 2:30 a.m. and the apartment was completely dark. As I walked down the hallway, I noticed something that made me freeze. There was a faint light coming from under Emma's bedroom door, not the warm glow of a lamp or the blue flicker of a TV screen. This was different, a pale, cold light that seemed to pulse gently. I stood in the hallway for several minutes, just watching this light. It would brighten for a few seconds, then dim, then brighten again. The pattern was hypnotic and unsettling. I pressed my ear against her door, trying to hear any sounds that might explain the light. What I heard made my blood run cold. Emma was talking, but she wasn't having a conversation. She was repeating the same phrases over and over again in a flat, emotionless tone. "Good morning, Sarah. How are you today?" "I'm fine, thank you for asking." "Good morning, Sarah. How are you today?" "I'm fine, thank you for asking." She repeated these same sentences for over an hour, the same greeting, the same response, the same inflection. It was like she was practicing human conversation. I backed away from the door and went back to my room, but I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed trying to make sense of what I had heard. Why would someone practice such basic social interactions? And why in the middle of the night? The next morning, Emma emerged from her room at exactly 7 a.m. as usual. When she saw me in the kitchen, she said, "Good morning, Sarah. How are you today?" It was the exact same phrase she had been practicing, delivered with the exact same inflection. When I responded that I was fine, she said, "I'm fine. Thank you for asking." "Do. The conversation I had overheard her practicing was happening in real time, and it was word for word identical to her rehearsal. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss any supernatural content, because this realization opened my eyes to just how many of Emma's interactions were following predetermined scripts. Over the next few days, I started listening more carefully to how Emma spoke. I realized that she had a very limited vocabulary of responses and that she repeated the same phrases in the same situations. When I asked how her work was going, she always said, "It's going well, thank you for asking." When I mentioned the weather, she always responded, "Yes, it's quite nice today." Her responses were appropriate but generic. She never offered specific details about her day, never asked follow-up questions, never engaged in the kind of natural back and forth that characterizes normal human conversation. I decided to test this theory. One evening, I asked her about her weekend plans. "I don't have any specific plans," she said. "I'll probably just relax at home." The next week, I asked the same question. She gave the identical response, word for word. I tested this several more times over the following weeks, and her answer never varied. I began asking her different questions to see how she would respond. I asked about her family, her hobbies, her favorite foods. Her answers were always polite, but vague. She never provided specific details that would indicate genuine personal experiences. When I asked about her family, she said, "I have a small family. We're not particularly close." When I asked about hobbies, she said, "I enjoy reading and quiet activities." When I asked about favorite foods, she said, "I prefer simple meals." These responses could apply to anyone. They were like placeholders, generic enough to be believable, but empty of any real substance. Share your own paranormal experiences in the comments section, because what I discovered next convinced me that Emma was not what she appeared to be. It was a Saturday in late November, and I had decided to spend the day cleaning the apartment. I was vacuuming the living room when I realized I hadn't seen Emma all day. Her door was closed, and I hadn't heard any of her usual sounds. I knocked on her door to let her know I was vacuuming in case the noise bothered her. There was no response. I knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. I tried the door handle, and it was unlocked. I opened it slowly and called her name. "Emma, are you okay?" The room was empty, but what I saw made me question everything I thought I knew about my roommate. The room was completely barren. There was no furniture, no decorations, no personal belongings. The 2 suitcases and cardboard box she had moved in with were sitting in the corner, but they appeared to be empty. There was no bed, no desk, no clothes in the closet. The room looked exactly like it had the day before she moved in. But the most disturbing part was the center of the room. There was a perfect circle drawn on the hardwood floor in what looked like white chalk. Inside the circle were symbols I didn't recognize, geometric shapes and markings that seemed to form some kind of pattern. I stepped into the room to get a closer look. The symbols were intricate and precise, clearly drawn by someone with steady hands and specific intent. They covered the entire interior of the circle, and each marking seemed to connect to the others in a complex design. As I stood there trying to make sense of what I was seeing, I heard the front door open. Emma's voice called out, "Sarah, I'm back." I quickly backed out of her room and closed the door. My heart was pounding as I tried to process what I had just seen. Where had Emma been all day? Why was her room empty? And what was the meaning of those symbols? When I went to the living room, Emma was standing by the front door, looking exactly as she always did. Same clothes, same hair, same expression. "Where were you today?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "I went out for a walk," she said. "I needed some fresh air." It was a typical Emma response, vague and generic. But I knew she was lying. She had been gone for at least 6 hours, and she showed no signs of having been outside. Her clothes weren't wrinkled, her hair wasn't disturbed by wind, and she didn't have the slightly tired look that comes from spending time outdoors. Comment below what you think those symbols meant, because that night I decided to investigate further. After Emma had gone to her room and the apartment was quiet, I decided to do some research. I sat at my laptop and tried to find information about the symbols I had seen. I searched for geometric symbols, ritual circles, supernatural markings, and anything else I could think of. What I found made my blood run cold. The symbols I had seen were associated with summoning and binding rituals. According to multiple sources, these types of markings were used in occult practices to create a connection between the physical world and other realms. The circle itself was meant to contain or focus supernatural energy. But the most disturbing information I found was about entities that could take human form. According to folklore and various accounts, certain supernatural beings could mimic human appearance and behavior, but they required specific rituals and symbols to maintain their disguise. The descriptions I read matched Emma's behavior perfectly. These entities were said to follow rigid patterns, repeat learned phrases, and avoid activities that might reveal their true nature. They were described as being able to perfectly imitate human appearance, but lacking the spontaneity and complexity of genuine human behavior. I spent hours reading about these entities, and everything I learned made me more convinced that Emma was not human. The strange eating habits, the lack of normal bodily functions, the repetitive speech patterns, the mysterious symbols in her room, it all pointed to something supernatural. Let me know if you want me to investigate this further, because what happened next confirmed my worst fears about what was living in my apartment. The next morning, I woke up determined to find more evidence. I waited until Emma left for one of her mysterious walks, and then I went back to her room. This time, I was prepared with my phone to document what I found. The room was exactly as I had left it, empty except for the suitcases and the strange circle of symbols. I took pictures of everything, making sure to capture the symbols in detail. I also checked the suitcases and the cardboard box. They were all empty. Emma had been living in this apartment for 2 months, and she had no possessions. No clothes, no toiletries, no books, no electronics. Nothing that would indicate a real person with a real life. I took photos of the empty containers and the barren room. As I was documenting everything, I noticed something I had missed before. The symbols in the circle weren't just drawn in chalk. They were carved into the hardwood floor. Someone had taken the time to carefully carve these markings into the wood. This wasn't temporary or casual. It was permanent and deliberate. Emma had modified the apartment in a way that would be nearly impossible to reverse. I knelt down and examined the carvings more closely. They were deep and precise, cut with some kind of sharp tool. The wood around the edges was smooth, indicating that whoever had done this had taken great care to make clean, exact lines. As I was taking pictures of the carvings, I heard the front door open again. Emma was back. I quickly left her room and closed the door behind me. I tried to act casual, but my hands were shaking as I went to the kitchen and pretended to be making coffee. "How was your walk?" I asked when she appeared in the kitchen. "It was nice," she said. "The weather is quite pleasant today." It was the same generic response she always gave, but this time I noticed something different about her voice. It sounded slightly mechanical, like she was reading from a script. I watched her more carefully as she moved around the kitchen. Her movements were precise and deliberate, but they lacked the natural fluidity of human motion. She walked in perfectly straight lines, turned at exact angles, and never made any unnecessary gestures. She opened the refrigerator and stood there for exactly 30 seconds, then closed it without taking anything out. She did this every day, but I had never paid attention to the timing before. Now that I was watching closely, I realized that all of her movements followed precise patterns. Hit the like button if this story is getting scary, because what I discovered next made me realize I was living with something that was only pretending to be human. That evening, I decided to confront Emma directly. I couldn't continue living with this uncertainty and fear. I needed to know what she was and what she wanted. At 6:47 p.m., I positioned myself in the kitchen before her usual eating routine. When she emerged from her room and saw me sitting at the table, she paused for a moment, the first time I had ever seen her hesitate. "Emma," I said, "we need to talk." She looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. "About what?" "About who you really are," I said. "About what you're doing in my apartment." For a long moment, she didn't respond. She just stood there, staring at me with those pale eyes that never seemed to blink enough. "I don't understand what you mean," she finally said. "I've been watching you, Emma. I've noticed things, the way you eat the same meal every night but nothing in the refrigerator ever changes, the way you never shower but always look the same, the way you practice conversations in your room." As I spoke, I watched her face carefully. A normal person would show surprise, confusion, or denial. Emma showed nothing. Her expression remained completely neutral. "I think you're confused," she said. "I saw the symbols in your room, Emma. I know what they mean." This time, her expression did change. For just a moment, something flickered across her face, something cold and inhuman. "You shouldn't have gone in my room," she said. Her voice was different now. The polite, practiced tone was gone, replaced by something flat and emotionless. "What are you?" I asked. She stared at me for a long moment. Then slowly, she smiled. But it wasn't a human smile. It was too wide, too perfect, and it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm your roommate," she said. "Isn't that what you wanted?" The way she said it made my skin crawl. There was something mocking in her tone, like she was playing a game I didn't understand. "You're not human," I said. "Does it matter?" she asked. "I pay rent. I'm quiet. I don't cause problems. What more do you want from a roommate?" I stood up from the table, my heart racing. "I want you to leave." She tilted her head to one side, like a curious animal. "This is my home now." "No," I said. "This is my apartment. I want you out." She laughed, and the sound was completely wrong. It was too sharp, too hollow, like it was coming from somewhere else entirely. "I don't think you understand," she said. "I'm not going anywhere." Subscribe for more terrifying true stories, because what happened next was the most frightening experience of my life. The temperature in the kitchen seemed to drop 10 degrees. I could see my breath as Emma stared at me with those pale, unblinking eyes. "You've been very rude," she said. "Going through my things, asking questions, making assumptions." As she spoke, I noticed that her appearance was starting to change. Her skin looked paler, almost translucent. Her hair seemed to be losing its color, fading to a dull gray. "I've been a perfect roommate," she continued. "I've followed all the rules. I've been exactly what you wanted. You're not real," I whispered. "Real," she laughed again. "What is real? I eat, I speak, I pay rent. I'm as real as you need me to be." I backed toward the kitchen door, but Emma moved to block my path. Her movements were faster now, less human-like. "Where are you going?" she asked. "We're having such a nice conversation." "Please," I said, "just leave me alone." "But we're roommates," she said. "We should get to know each other better." She reached out toward me, and I saw that her fingernails had grown longer and sharper. They looked more like claws than human nails. I ran. I pushed past her and ran to my bedroom, slamming the door behind me. I could hear her laughing in the kitchen, that horrible hollow sound that seemed to echo through the entire apartment. I grabbed my phone and called 911, but what was I going to tell them? That my roommate wasn't human, that there was a supernatural entity living in my apartment. They would think I was crazy. I hung up and tried to think. I needed help, but I didn't know who to turn to. I couldn't stay in the apartment, but I also couldn't leave. This was my home, my lease, my life. I could hear Emma moving around in the kitchen, but the sounds were different now. Instead of her usual precise footsteps, I heard something that sounded like scratching or scraping across the floor. I decided to call my sister, who lived about an hour away. She answered on the second ring. "Sarah? What's wrong? You sound terrible." "I need help," I said. "Something's wrong with my roommate. She's not human." There was a pause. "What do you mean?" I tried to explain everything, the strange behaviors, the symbols, the confrontation. As I spoke, I could hear how crazy it sounded, but my sister listened without interrupting. "I'm coming over," she said when I finished. "Don't leave your room until I get there." "No," I said. "It's not safe. I don't know what she's capable of." "I'm not leaving you alone with that thing," she said. "I'll be there in an hour." After we hung up, I sat in my room listening to the sounds from the kitchen. The scraping had stopped, but now I could hear Emma talking again. She was repeating the same phrases she had used during our confrontation, but her voice sounded different, multiplied, like there were several people speaking at once. "This is my home now. This is my home now. This is my home now." The words were repeated over and over, growing louder and more distorted with each repetition. Let me know in the comments if you want a part 2 to this story, because what happened when my sister arrived was beyond anything I could have imagined. I spent the next hour barricaded in my room, listening to the increasingly disturbing sounds coming from the rest of the apartment. Emma's voice continued to repeat phrases, but now it sounded like she was speaking in multiple voices at once, sometimes high-pitched, sometimes deep, sometimes in languages I didn't recognize. The scraping sounds returned, accompanied by what sounded like furniture being moved around. But I knew Emma didn't have any furniture in her room. What was she moving? Around 9:30 p.m., I heard a knock at the front door. It was my sister, but Emma's voice called out first. "Sarah has a visitor," she said in a sing-song tone. "How nice. How very nice." I heard the front door open and my sister's voice. "Hi, I'm Sarah's sister. You must be Emma." "I must be," Emma replied. Come in. Make yourself at home." There was something wrong with Emma's voice. It sounded too cheerful, too excited. I could hear them talking in the living room, but I couldn't make out the words. Then I heard my sister scream. I ran out of my room and found them both standing in the living room. My sister was pressed against the wall, her face pale with terror. Emma was standing in the center of the room, but she looked completely different from how she had appeared earlier. Her skin was now translucent, and I could see dark veins underneath. Her hair had turned completely white, and her eyes had changed from brown to a pale milky color. She was still wearing the same clothes, but they looked faded and worn, like they were decades old. "Your sister is very pretty," Emma said, turning to look at me. "She has such nice, warm blood." My sister was trying to speak, but only strangled sounds came out. She was pointing at Emma with a shaking hand. "What did you do to her?" I demanded. "Nothing yet," Emma said, "but the night is young." She turned back to my sister, and I saw that her mouth had changed. Her teeth were longer and sharper, and her smile was too wide for her face. "Tell me," Emma said to my sister, "do you believe in monsters?" My sister finally found her voice and let out a blood-curdling scream that seemed to snap Emma out of whatever trance she was in. The entity's head snapped toward the sound with an unnatural bird-like motion that made my stomach lurch. "Such a lovely sound," Emma said, her voice now carrying an otherworldly echo. "It's been so long since I've heard genuine fear." I grabbed my sister's arm and pulled her toward the front door, but Emma moved faster than any human could. One moment she was standing in the center of the room, the next she was blocking our path to the exit. "Leaving so soon?" she asked, tilting her head at an impossible angle. "But we were just getting acquainted." Hit the like button if you're feeling the terror, because what happened next revealed the true horror of what I had been living with. Emma's form began to shift and change before our eyes. Her limbs stretched longer, her fingers extended into razor-sharp claws, and her face elongated into something that was almost human, but wrong in every conceivable way. Her pale eyes grew larger and seemed to glow with an inner light. "Do you know how long I've been searching for the perfect host?" she asked, her voice now a chorus of whispers. "Someone young, someone alone, someone who wouldn't be missed right away." "What are you?" I managed to ask, though my voice came out as barely a whisper. "I am hunger," she replied. "I am need. I am the thing that slips through the cracks between worlds, seeking warmth and life and the sweet taste of human essence." My sister grabbed my hand, and I could feel her trembling. We were trapped between this creature and the wall, with no clear escape route. "Sarah," my sister whispered, "the symbols you told me about, where are they?" I understood immediately. "Her room," I said quietly. Emma's enhanced hearing caught our whispered conversation. "The binding circle," she laughed. "You think destroying it will send me back? Oh, sweet child, you understand so little." But she moved to block the hallway leading to the bedrooms, which told me my sister was right. The symbols were important. "I don't need the circle anymore," Emma continued. "I've fed enough on your life force over these past months to sustain myself independently. Every night you slept under the same roof, every conversation we shared, every moment of trust you gave me, it all made me stronger." Subscribe for more terrifying true stories, because I realized that Emma had been slowly draining my energy for months without me knowing it. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. All those times I had felt unusually tired. All those mornings I'd woken up feeling drained despite getting enough sleep. Emma had been feeding on me. She'd been using our proximity to sustain herself, growing stronger while I grew weaker. "You felt it, didn't you?" Emma said, reading my expression. "The fatigue, the sense that something was missing. I've been so careful, taking just enough to survive but not enough to kill you. A perfect symbiotic relationship." "You're a parasite," I said, anger beginning to override my fear. "I'm a survivor," she corrected, "and I'm very good at what I do. I've lived in dozens of apartments with dozens of roommates for decades. Some figured it out faster than others. Some never figured it out at all." "What happened to them?" my sister asked. Emma's smile widened impossibly. "The ones who discovered my true nature, they had to be dealt with. I couldn't risk exposure. But the others, the oblivious ones, they lived long, happy lives, never knowing they were sharing their vitality with something wonderful." The casual way she spoke about killing people made my blood run cold. How many had died because of this creature? How many people had simply vanished, written off as runaways or victims of urban violence? "But you," Emma continued, focusing on me, "you're special. You're more observant than most, more intuitive. You notice the patterns, ask the right questions. It's almost a shame to kill you." "Almost," I asked. "Well, you've seen too much now. And your sister, she's an unexpected complication. I can't let either of you leave. Let me know in the comments if you've ever felt like someone was draining your energy, because what happened next was our desperate attempt to escape." I looked around the room frantically, searching for anything that could help us. The kitchen was to our right, and I remembered the knife block on the counter, but would physical weapons even work against something like Emma? "Sarah," my sister whispered, "when I say run, head for the kitchen. Get a knife." Before I could respond, my sister suddenly lunged forward, not at Emma, but at the lamp on the side table. She grabbed it and hurled it at the creature's face. "Run!" she screamed. Emma dodged the lamp with inhuman speed, but the distraction was enough. I sprinted toward the kitchen while my sister ran in the opposite direction, toward the bedrooms. I reached the knife block and grabbed the largest knife I could find. Behind me, I could hear Emma's frustrated shriek as she realized we had split up. "Clever!" her voice echoed through the apartment. "But it won't help you." I could hear my sister in the hallway trying to get into Emma's room. The door was locked, but she was throwing her weight against it. Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway, her form now fully transformed into something nightmarish. She was at least 7 feet tall, with arms that hung nearly to the floor and fingers that ended in black claws. Her face was a grotesque parody of human features, with too many teeth and eyes that glowed like pale flames. "A knife," she laughed. "How quaint. Do you think you can hurt me with that little toy?" I raised the knife defensively, but she was right. It felt pathetically inadequate against something so otherworldly. "I don't need to hurt you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I just need to slow you down." She lunged at me with lightning speed, but I was ready. I slashed at her arm as she reached for me, and the knife actually connected. Black liquid that might have been blood sprayed across the kitchen counter. Emma shrieked and pulled back, staring at the wound on her arm. The cut was already healing, but it had clearly caused her pain. "You little bitch," she snarled. "I was going to make this quick." From the hallway, I heard the sound of splintering wood. My sister had broken through the door. "Sarah," she called, "I found the circle. How do I destroy it?" Comment below what you think we should do next, because Emma's reaction to my sister's discovery was pure rage. Emma's head snapped toward the hallway, and she let out a sound that was part scream, part roar. It was so loud and inhuman that it seemed to shake the entire apartment. "No!" she screamed, abandoning me to rush toward her room. I followed, still clutching the knife. In Emma's room, I found my sister standing in the center of the symbol circle, stamping her feet on the carved markings. "It's not working," she said. "They're cut too deep." Emma appeared in the doorway, her form flickering between human and monster. "Get away from there," she commanded, but something had changed. Her voice was less commanding now, more desperate. The damage to the symbols was affecting her somehow. "Keep going," I told my sister. "It's working." I joined her in the circle, and we both began stomping on the carved symbols. Some of the shallower marks began to splinter and break under our combined weight. Emma rushed into the room, but as she crossed the threshold, something strange happened. Her monstrous form began to waver like a bad TV signal. She was losing cohesion. "You don't understand," she said, her voice now layered with panic. "If you destroy the circle completely, it won't send me back. It will trap me here in this form forever." "Good," I said, continuing to stomp on the symbols. "No!" Emma screamed. "I'll die. I'll fade away into nothing." For a moment, I felt a twinge of something that might have been sympathy. But then I remembered all the people she had killed, all the lives she had destroyed. "You should have thought of that before you became a monster," I said. "Share your own paranormal experiences in the comments section, because what happened next was the climax of our supernatural battle." Emma made one final, desperate lunge at us, but her form was becoming increasingly unstable. Her claws passed through my sister like she was made of smoke, and when she tried to grab me, her hands couldn't maintain their solidity. "Please," she begged, her voice now barely a whisper. "I can leave. I can find someone else. Just let me go." "How many people have begged you the same way?" I asked, continuing to destroy the symbols. Emma's form began to flicker faster, like a candle flame in a strong wind. "I was human once," she said. "Long ago. I was trapped by something else, something worse. I didn't choose this." I stopped stomping and looked at her. Even in her monstrous form, I could see something that might have been genuine anguish in her pale eyes. "What happened to you?" I asked. "I was young," she said, her voice fading. "I lived in a boarding house in New York, 1952. My roommate. She was like me now. She trapped me, fed on me until I became like her. It's a cycle, don't you see? I have to feed to survive, and feeding creates more like me. Then we're stopping the cycle," my sister said firmly, and resumed destroying the symbols. Emma's form began to dissolve entirely. "You're condemning me to oblivion," she said. "You condemned yourself," I replied. With a final heartbreaking wail, Emma's form scattered like smoke in the wind. The pale light that had emanated from her eyes flickered once and went out. The room fell silent except for our heavy breathing. We stood there for several minutes, making sure she was really gone. The oppressive feeling that had hung over the apartment for months had lifted, replaced by a sense of emptiness. "Is it over?" my sister asked. I looked around the room. The symbols were mostly destroyed, and there was no sign of Emma's presence. The temperature had returned to normal, and the air felt clean again. "I think so," I said. "Hit that notification bell so you don't miss any supernatural content, because the aftermath of our encounter revealed even more disturbing truths." After we were sure Emma was gone, we spent the rest of the night researching the entity we had just destroyed. Using the photos I had taken of the symbols, we found references to similar markings in various occult texts and paranormal accounts. What we discovered was deeply disturbing. Emma had been telling the truth about being trapped in a cycle. These entities, sometimes called psychic vampires or life drainers, were created when humans were exposed to supernatural parasites for extended periods. The process was gradual and irreversible. The human host would slowly lose their humanity as the parasite fed on their life force, eventually becoming a parasite themselves. The original human consciousness would be subsumed by the entity's need to feed and survive. According to our research, Emma had probably been trapped in this existence for over 70 years, moving from apartment to apartment, city to city, feeding on unsuspecting roommates and occasionally creating new entities when the process went too far. We found records of similar disappearances going back decades, young people who had vanished from their apartments, leaving behind confused roommates who described strange behavior in the days leading up to their disappearance. "How many people did she kill?" my sister asked. I had been wondering the same thing. Based on the timeline and the pattern of behavior, Emma had probably been responsible for dozens of deaths over the decades. Each victim had been someone like me, young, alone, looking for an affordable place to live. The rental listings, the perfect responses, the cash payments, it was all part of a carefully crafted hunting strategy. Emma had perfected the art of being the ideal roommate, at least on the surface. Let me know if you want me to investigate this further, because what we found in Emma's belongings raised even more questions. The next morning, we returned to Emma's room to clean up the remnants of the destroyed symbols and see if she had left anything behind. Her suitcases and cardboard box were still there, and we decided to examine them more thoroughly. Inside the first suitcase, we found a collection of identification documents, driver's licenses, social security cards, and rental agreements dating back to the 1950s. All of them showed the same face, the same person, but with different names and addresses. Emma had been many people over the decades: Margaret Thompson in 1952, Susan Mitchell in 1961, Carol Stevens in 1975. The list went on, each identity carefully maintained for several years before being abandoned. The second suitcase contained photographs, hundreds of them, showing Emma with different roommates over the years. In the early photos, she looked exactly as she had when I met her. In the later ones, she appeared unchanged while the world around her evolved. Each photo showed Emma with a different person, always young, always alone, always smiling with the same trusting expression I had probably worn when I first met her. At the bottom of each photo, in neat handwriting, was a date and a single word: finished. "These are her victims," my sister said, holding up a photograph from 1967. She kept trophies. The cardboard box contained the most disturbing items. Inside were personal belongings that had obviously been taken from Emma's victims: jewelry, photographs, letters, small keepsakes. Each item was carefully labeled with a name and date. Among these items, I found something that made my blood run cold. It was a Polaroid photograph of myself, taken while I was sleeping. On the back, in Emma's neat handwriting, was yesterday's date and the word "finished." "She was planning to kill you," my sister said. "Tonight was supposed to be the end." I stared at the photograph, trying to process how close I had come to becoming another victim. If I hadn't discovered Emma's true nature, if my sister hadn't come to help, I would have been just another missing person with a strange story about a perfect roommate who had suddenly vanished. Subscribe if you want to hear more terrifying true stories, because what we discovered next made us realize our nightmare wasn't completely over. At the bottom of the box, underneath all the stolen keepsakes, we found a leather journal. It was old and worn, filled with entries in Emma's handwriting dating back to 1952. The early entries were heartbreaking. They described a young woman named Emma Patterson who had just moved to New York City to pursue her dreams of becoming an actress. She had found a room in a boarding house and was excited about her new life. But as the entries progressed, the tone changed. Emma began describing strange experiences with her roommate, a woman who never seemed to sleep, who ate the same meal every day, who spoke in repetitive patterns. The parallels to my own experience were terrifying. Emma had lived through exactly what I had just experienced, but she hadn't been able to escape. The journal entries became increasingly desperate as Emma realized what was happening to her. She wrote about feeling drained, about losing pieces of herself, about trying to flee but being unable to leave. The final entry, dated December 15th, 1952, was barely legible. "I can feel myself disappearing. She's taken almost everything that made me human. I tried to fight, but she's too strong. I'm becoming like her. God help me, I'm becoming like her. If anyone finds this, know that I was Emma Patterson, and I was real, and I didn't want this to happen to me." And after that, the handwriting changed. The entries became clinical, detached, describing feeding patterns and hunting techniques. Emma Patterson had died, and the entity had taken her place. "She was a victim too," my sister said softly. I felt tears streaming down my face. Emma had been a person once, with dreams and hopes and a life ahead of her. The monster I had destroyed had once been as human as I was. But then I remembered the photographs, the stolen keepsakes, the decades of victims. Emma Patterson had died in 1952, but the entity wearing her face had killed dozens of people since then. "She was a victim," I said, "but she became a monster, and we stopped her." Comment below what you think happened to Emma's other victims, because we weren't finished with our investigation. We spent the rest of the day researching the names and dates from Emma's journal and photograph collection. Using online databases and old newspaper archives, we tried to find information about her victims. What we found was a pattern of disappearances spanning 7 decades. Young people, mostly women, who had vanished from their apartments without a trace. In each case, roommates or neighbors described the missing person as having recently moved in with someone who seemed too good to be true. The police reports were frustratingly similar. No signs of struggle, no evidence of foul play, no leads to follow. The missing persons had simply vanished, leaving behind confused friends and family members who insisted that disappearing was completely out of character. In some cases, the roommate had also vanished, leading investigators to assume that both people had left together voluntarily. But we now knew the truth. Emma had killed her victims and then moved on to the next city, the next identity, the next hunting ground. We found 23 confirmed cases that matched Emma's pattern, but there were probably more. Not every disappearance would have been reported, and not every police report would have survived in digital archives. 23 people, my sister said, at least 23. I thought about the photograph collection, the carefully labeled trophies. Emma had been proud of her kills, had kept mementos of each victim. It was a level of premeditation and cruelty that made my stomach turn. But the most disturbing discovery came when we researched Emma's own disappearance in 1952. According to the records, Emma Patterson had vanished from her boarding house room without a trace. Her roommate, a woman named Margaret Holloway, had also disappeared around the same time. Margaret Holloway, my sister said, reading from the police report. That was Emma's first identity after she was transformed. The cycle of predation stretched back even further than we had realized. Emma had been created by another entity, who had probably been created by another before her. The chain of victims and monsters might have been continuing for centuries. How many more are there? I asked. We had no way of knowing. Emma's journal mentioned others like her, but provided no details about their locations or identities. For all we knew, there could be dozens of these entities operating in cities across the world, each one feeding on unsuspecting victims. We have to do something, my sister said. We can't just let this continue. But what could we do? We had barely survived our encounter with Emma, and we had only succeeded because we had caught her off guard. Other entities would be more careful, more prepared. We can warn people, I said, share our story, help others recognize the signs. It wasn't much, but it was something. If even one person saw the warning signs and escaped, it would be worth it. Let me know in the comments if you've ever noticed someone in your life following unnaturally precise routines, because there might be more of these entities out there than we realized. We decided to contact the police about Emma's disappearance, but we quickly realized that our story was too unbelievable to be taken seriously. How could we explain that our roommate had been a supernatural entity? How could we prove that she had killed people over the course of 70 years? Instead, we focused on documenting everything we had discovered. We photographed the journal entries, the identification documents, the victim photographs. We compiled a timeline of Emma's activities and created a detailed profile of her hunting methods. We also researched other disappearances that didn't match Emma's specific pattern, looking for signs of different supernatural entities. What we found was disturbing. There were patterns within patterns, suggesting that Emma was just one type of predator in a much larger supernatural ecosystem. Some disappearances involved people who had been seen talking to strangers who perfectly matched their ideal romantic partner. Others involved individuals who had accepted help from Good Samaritans who seemed too helpful, too convenient. Each pattern suggested a different type of entity with its own hunting strategy. Some posed as roommates, others as romantic partners, still others as helpful strangers. But they all shared certain characteristics. They were too perfect, too convenient, too willing to provide exactly what their victims needed. It's like they're studying us, my sister said. Learning what we want, what we need, and then becoming that thing. The thought was terrifying. If these entities were adapting and evolving their hunting strategies, how could anyone be safe? How could you trust anyone new in your life? But then I remembered Emma's limitations. Despite her supernatural abilities, she had been bound by rigid patterns. She couldn't improvise, couldn't adapt to unexpected situations. Her responses were scripted, her behaviors programmed. They're not human, I said. They can mimic us, but they can't truly understand us. That's their weakness. Share this video with someone who loves horror stories, because what we did next was our attempt to warn others about these entities. We created a comprehensive guide to recognizing supernatural predators based on our experience with Emma and our research into similar entities. The guide included warning signs, protection methods, and emergency procedures for anyone who suspected they might be dealing with something inhuman. The warning signs were subtle but consistent. Unnaturally precise routines and behaviors, repetitive speech patterns and scripted responses, lack of normal human needs, eating, sleeping, personal hygiene, 2 perfect responses to roommate or dating profiles, preference for cash transactions and minimal documentation, absence of genuine personal belongings or history, reluctance to be photographed or recorded, strange reactions to religious symbols or running water, the protection. Methods were mostly psychological, trusting your instincts, asking probing questions, varying your own routines to see if the other person adapted. The emergency procedures were more practical: how to document evidence, how to safely escape, how to destroy binding symbols if you found them. We posted our guide on every platform we could think of: Reddit, Facebook, paranormal forums, urban legend websites. Most people dismissed it as fiction, but a few took it seriously. Within a week, we started receiving messages from people who claimed to have similar experiences. A woman in Portland who had noticed her roommate's strange eating habits. A man in Chicago who realized his girlfriend never seemed to sleep. A college student in Austin who found symbols carved into her apartment floor. Some of these reports were probably hoaxes or misunderstandings, but others had details that were too specific, too consistent with Emma's behavior patterns. "There are more of them," my sister said after we had received a dozen similar reports. Emma wasn't unique. The thought was both terrifying and oddly comforting. Terrifying because it meant these entities were widespread, but comforting because it meant we weren't alone in our experience. We began corresponding with other survivors, sharing information and strategies. Slowly, we started to build a network of people who had encountered these entities and lived to tell about it. Hit that like button if this story gave you chills, because what we learned from other survivors revealed the true scope of this supernatural threat. The survivors we contacted had encountered different types of entities, but their experiences shared common elements. The entities were all mimics of some kind, perfectly adapted to exploit human needs and desires. They were patient, methodical, and extremely dangerous when cornered. But they also shared the same weaknesses. They couldn't truly improvise or adapt to unexpected situations. They were bound by the rules of whatever supernatural force had created them, and they could be destroyed if you understood their nature and were willing to fight back. One survivor, a man named David from Seattle, had destroyed an entity that posed as his perfect romantic partner. He had discovered that the creature was bound to a locket it always wore, and destroying the locket had destroyed the entity. Another survivor, a woman named Maria from Miami, had encountered an entity that posed as a helpful neighbor. She had realized the creature's true nature when she noticed it never cast a shadow, and she had driven it away by surrounding her apartment with mirrors. Each entity had its own binding method, its own weakness, its own way of being destroyed, but they all shared the same fundamental nature. They were parasites, feeding on human life force and emotions. "We're building a database," I told my sister, "a guide for fighting back." It became our mission, our way of dealing with the trauma of what we had experienced. We couldn't save Emma's victims, but we could help future victims save themselves. The database grew slowly but steadily. We documented different types of entities, their hunting methods, their weaknesses, their binding objects or symbols. We created a network of survivors who could provide support and advice to new victims. We also started investigating the origins of these entities. Where did they come from? How long had they existed? Was there a way to stop them permanently? The answers we found were disturbing. According to the oldest accounts we could find, these entities had been preying on humans for centuries. They seemed to be part of a larger, supernatural ecosystem, with different species filling different ecological niches. Some fed on life force, others on emotions, still others on memories or dreams. They were perfectly adapted to human society, able to blend in and hunt without detection. "They're not invaders," my sister said. "They're natives. They've been here as long as we have." Subscribe for more terrifying true stories. because our investigation led us to a disturbing conclusion about the true nature of reality. The more we learned about these entities, the more we realized that the world was far stranger and more dangerous than most people imagined. The supernatural wasn't a separate realm that occasionally intruded on our reality. It was woven into the fabric of everyday life. How many people had encountered these entities without realizing it? How many unexplained disappearances, unsolved murders, and mysterious accidents were actually the result of supernatural predation? The thought was overwhelming. If our experience with Emma was any indication, these entities were everywhere, hiding in plain sight, perfectly mimicking human behavior while feeding on human victims. But we also realized that knowledge was power. The more people who understood the threat, the harder it would be for these entities to operate. Each survivor who shared their story, each person who learned to recognize the warning signs, made the world a little bit safer. "We're not helpless," I told my sister. "We can fight back." It became our mantra, our way of coping with the knowledge that monsters were real and living among us. We couldn't eliminate the threat entirely, but we could make it harder for entities like Emma to succeed. We continued to expand our database, document new cases, and support other survivors. It was dangerous work. Some entities might target us for interfering with their hunting, but it was also necessary. "Emma was right about one thing," my sister said. "It is a cycle, but we're breaking it. Every survivor who shared their story, every person who learned to recognize the warning signs, every entity that was destroyed, it all contributed to breaking the cycle of predation that had continued for centuries. The network we had built began to take on a life of its own. Survivors connected with each other, shared resources, and worked together to identify and eliminate threats. We became a community of people who had seen the true nature of reality and chosen to fight back against it. Comment below what you think we should do next, because our story doesn't end with Emma's destruction. 6 months after our encounter with Emma, we received a message that changed everything. It was from a woman named Dr. Rebecca Chen, who claimed to be a researcher studying supernatural entities. "I've been following your work," her message said. "I think we need to talk." Dr. Chen was a professor of anthropology at UCLA, but her real work was investigating paranormal phenomena. She had been studying entities like Emma for over a decade, and she had access to resources we couldn't imagine. "You're not the first to discover these creatures," she told us when we met. "There have been others throughout history, but most of them were killed or discredited before they could share their knowledge." She showed us files dating back to the 1800s, documenting encounters with various types of supernatural entities. The reports were remarkably consistent, describing creatures that perfectly mimicked human behavior while feeding on human victims. "There's a pattern," Dr. Chen explained. "These entities appear in greater numbers during times of social upheaval, when people are more isolated and vulnerable. They thrive in urban environments where anonymity is easy to maintain." She had identified at least 12 different types of entities, each with its own hunting strategy and weaknesses. Emma had been what she called a life drain mimic, but there were others: emotional feeders, memory thieves, dream parasites. "We think they're part of a larger ecosystem," Dr. Chen said, "a supernatural food chain that exists parallel to our own reality." The implications were staggering. If Dr. Chen was right, then these entities weren't just random monsters. They were part of an organized system, possibly with their own hierarchy and goals. "What do they want?" I asked. "Survival," Dr. Chen said. "Same as any predator. But some of the older entities seem to have larger ambitions. They're not just feeding, they're planning something." She showed us evidence of increased entity activity in major cities around the world. The patterns suggested coordination, as if different types of entities were working together toward some common goal. "We need to stop them," my sister said. "We need to understand them first," Dr. Chen replied. "And for that, we need more survivors like you. Let me know if you want me to investigate this further, because Dr. Chen's research opened up a whole new level of the supernatural threat." Dr. Chen invited us to join her research team, a small group of academics and survivors who were working to understand and combat supernatural entities. The team included experts in folklore, psychology, physics, and theology, all united by their encounters with things that shouldn't exist. "We call ourselves the Threshold Institute," Dr. Chen explained. "We study the boundaries between the natural and supernatural worlds." The institute had been operating in secret for over 20 years, documenting supernatural phenomena and developing strategies for dealing with various types of entities. They had case files on hundreds of encounters, from simple hauntings to complex predator networks. "Your experience with Emma was significant," Dr. Chen said. "Life drain mimics are extremely dangerous, but they're also relatively rare. Most people who encounter them don't survive to share their story." She showed us a map of the United States, marked with pins representing confirmed entity sightings. The pattern was disturbing. Concentrations in major urban areas, with lines connecting cities that showed possible migration routes. "They're spreading," Dr. Chen said, "or being directed to spread. We think there's some kind of central intelligence coordinating their activities." The idea of a supernatural intelligence directing these entities was terrifying. It suggested a level of organization and planning that went far beyond individual predators hunting for survival. "What's their endgame?" I asked. "We don't know," Dr. Chen admitted. "But we're seeing increased activity in major population centers. Whatever they're planning, it's going to affect a lot of people." We agreed to join the Institute, bringing our experience and survivor network to bear on the larger threat. It felt good to be part of something bigger, to know that we weren't fighting alone. The Institute's resources were impressive. They had access to historical records, scientific equipment, and a network of informants in various supernatural communities. They also had funding from sources they preferred not to discuss. "There are people in government who know about this," Dr. Chen said. "Not many, but enough to provide support when we need it." Our first assignment was to investigate a series of disappearances in San Francisco that matched the pattern of entity predation. 3 young professionals had vanished from their apartments over the past month, all leaving behind confused roommates who described strange behavior in the days before the disappearances. Share your own paranormal experiences in the comments section, because what we discovered in San Francisco revealed that the threat was evolving. The San Francisco case was more complex than Emma's simple predation pattern. The missing people had all been part of a larger social network, and their disappearances seemed to be coordinated rather than random. "It's not individual hunting," Dr. Chen observed. "It's organized harvesting. The entities responsible were working together, possibly different types coordinating their activities. One would identify suitable victims, another would infiltrate their social circle, and a third would handle the actual predation." "They're getting smarter," my sister said, "learning from cases like Emma's." We spent weeks investigating the San Francisco network, mapping connections between the victims and their social circles. What we found was disturbing. The entities had been operating for months, carefully selecting victims and eliminating them in a way that minimized suspicion. "They're farming us," I said, "like livestock." The thought was horrifying, but it explained the patterns we were seeing. The entities weren't just random predators. They were part of an organized system designed to harvest human life force on an industrial scale. Our investigation led us to a warehouse in the Mission District, where we discovered evidence of a much larger operation. The building contained dozens of empty rooms, each one marked with the same types of symbols we had found in Emma's apartment. "This is a processing facility," Dr. Chen said grimly. "They're not just killing people, they're converting them." The implications were staggering. If the entities could convert humans into more entities, then their numbers would grow exponentially. What started as a few dozen predators could become thousands, then millions. "We have to stop them," I said. "We have to warn people," Dr. Chen replied. "This is bigger than we can handle alone." "But how do you warn the world about a threat that most people won't believe exists? How do you convince a rational, scientific society that monsters are real and living among us?" "We start small," my sister said. "We build the network, one survivor at a time." It was the same strategy we had used after Emma's destruction, but on a much larger scale. We would document every case, support every survivor, and slowly build a community of people who understood the threat. The work was dangerous and often thankless. Most people dismissed our warnings as fiction or delusion, but a few listened, and those few became the foundation of a larger resistance movement. "We're not just fighting monsters," Dr. Chen told us. "We're fighting for the future of human civilization." The words sounded dramatic, but after everything we had experienced, I believed them. The entities weren't just individual predators. They were part of a larger threat that could fundamentally change the nature of human society. But we had one advantage that the entities didn't expect. We were human, and humans have always been good at adapting to threats. We could learn, improvise, and work together in ways that the entities couldn't match. "Emma made one mistake," I said. "She underestimated us." "Let's make sure the others do the same," my sister replied. "Hit that notification bell so you don't miss any supernatural content, because our fight against the entities was just beginning." The Threshold Institute became our new home, our base of operations in a war that most people didn't know was being fought. What started as a small research facility in an abandoned government building had grown into something much larger, a sanctuary for survivors, a training ground for fighters, and a beacon of hope in an increasingly dangerous world. Dr. Chen had transformed the institute into a sophisticated operation. The basement levels housed our research laboratories, where we studied entity remains and developed new detection methods. The upper floors contained living quarters for survivors and training facilities, where we taught people how to recognize and defend against entity infiltration. "We're not just documenting the threat anymore," Dr. Chen explained to a group of new recruits. "We're actively fighting it." The network my sister had envisioned had become reality. We had contacts in dozens of cities, safe houses across the country, and a growing database of entity behavior patterns. What had started as 3 people investigating a strange death had evolved into a coordinated resistance movement. But our success came with a price. The entities had noticed our activities, and they were adapting faster than we had anticipated. They began targeting our safe houses, infiltrating our networks, and eliminating our most effective operatives. The war was escalating, and the stakes were getting higher. "They're learning from us, just as we're learning from them," my sister observed during one of our strategy meetings. "It's becoming an arms race." The turning point came when we discovered the entity's true weakness. It wasn't just iron or salt or any of the traditional protections. It was human connection itself, the bonds between people that the entities could never fully understand or replicate. They're parasites, I realized. They can mimic human behavior, but they can't create genuine human relationships. That's why they have to harvest what we have naturally. This insight led to our most effective defense strategy. Instead of trying to hide from the entities, we began building stronger communities. We taught people how to recognize the signs of entity infiltration, how to verify each other's humanity, and how to support those who had been affected by entity predation. The work was slow and often frustrating. For every person we saved, we lost others. For every entity we destroyed, more seemed to take its place. But gradually, we began to see results. Reports of successful defenses increased. Survivor networks grew stronger. The entity's hunting patterns became less effective as people learned to protect themselves and each other. "We're not going to win this war with weapons," Dr. Chen told us during one of our final meetings at the Institute. "We're going to win it with community." 5 years after Emma's death, the world had changed. The entity threat hadn't disappeared, but it had been contained. People were more aware, more connected, more willing to look out for each other. The monsters were still out there, but they no longer had the advantage of invisibility. I often think about Emma and what she would have thought of how her story ended. She had been so focused on individual predation, on taking what she needed from isolated victims. She never understood that her greatest weakness wasn't her physical limitations. It was her inability to comprehend the power of human solidarity. "She taught us something important," my sister said as we stood in the Institute's memorial garden, where we had planted a tree for every victim we hadn't been able to save. She showed us that the real monsters aren't the ones hiding in the shadows. They're the ones who try to make us forget how to care for each other. The Threshold Institute continues its work today, though I've stepped back from active operations. The next generation of researchers and fighters have taken over, and they're better equipped than we ever were. They have better tools, better knowledge, and most importantly, better support networks. But the most important lesson we learned isn't about fighting monsters. It's about staying human in a world that sometimes seems designed to strip away our humanity. The entities fed on isolation, fear, and disconnection. Our greatest weapon against them was the opposite: community, courage, and the willingness to trust each other even when trust seemed dangerous. Emma's story didn't end with her destruction. It ended with the thousands of people who learned to protect themselves and each other because of what we discovered about her. She wanted to harvest human life force, but instead, she inadvertently helped us discover how to amplify it. The threshold between human and monster isn't crossed through predation or parasitism. It's crossed when we stop caring about each other's well-being. As long as we remember that lesson, the real monsters will never win. The fight continues, but we're no longer fighting alone, and that makes all the difference. From the archives of the Threshold Institute, remember, stay connected, stay human, stay vigilant.